I'm Claudine Wong, joining you from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm joined now by Gabe Saglier, who is a longtime travel expert, been in this industry and watching it forever. And now we are in these unprecedented times. And Gabe, the question is, how long is it going to take us to recover? I mean, I think right now we're still in this phase of just trying to, I don't know, put a Band-Aid on it, but trying to deal with cancellations, trying to figure out how long we have to cancel before we can even talk about when we'll travel again.
Yeah, no, I think the focus currently right now is on the traveler. I think you're seeing pretty unprecedented flexibility out there and sort of a safety net that's being issued to travelers. If you end up booking now, if you have a trip booked, listen, at the end of the day, if you want to cancel it, you're going to avoid a lot of the fees that have been in place for so many years. The industry clearly would rather you postpone your travel versus canceling it. But hey, if you've got an airline that, because it is slashing capacity, in some cases up to 90%, cancels a flight on you, then you're certainly entitled to a refund. There's been a couple of hiccups here in recent weeks over that, but generally speaking, we're seeing airlines, we're seeing hotels, we're seeing vacation companies be as flexible as we've ever seen them, trying to extend sort of a safety net to consumers. That's become priority one in the short term right now.
Right. Is this a public relations also? I mean, they want to make customers feel like they were treated right in this, as everyone's scared. And I think the message as well is they can't divert from the don't travel. I mean, sometimes when we have some issues coming up, people are like, well, you can still do this, or here's how we're going to deal with this. Or here in the beginning, it was, here's what we're doing to keep you safe. Now the message is fairly universal. And so no one can really deny that you should travel with us or you should not travel with us. I mean, the message is don't travel.
Which is so antithetical and counterintuitive for people like me who are in the business of inspiring people like, hey, Claudine, yes, you should take the family to Portugal this year. This is the year to do it. So it is. And I got to say, the message was sort of a moving target at the very beginning of this because, yes, first it was China. And so we were looking at alternatives. And then it was Italy. And I think as soon as this actually rolled into Italy and started to spread across the country, we started to see some of the measures that were taking place there on the ground. You started to realize, well, this is a little closer to home than we thought. But even then, we were looking at alternatives to Italy proper. Pretty quickly after that, within days, if not within a week, the message had to really sink in. The travel industry did hop on, even on a global level. It was pretty in sync at that point by mid-March that no, you really should not travel. You should heed these mandates. Stay home, stay put. The priority one at that point was to keep this thing from spreading. Priority two became, let's make this as easy for consumers and travelers to grapple with. So let's make refunds and cancellations as easy as possible. But you did see customer service, volume increase 2 to 3 times and we've been victims of that because at the end of the day, it was a manpower issue.
Right. And also, I think you didn't want to get people stuck. And that was also because people were getting stuck. They were going to Hawaii, and then all of a sudden you're going to be quarantined for 14 days if you're still going to try to go to Hawaii. So your vacation will be a lot longer. We've seen stories of that couple who was stuck in the Maldives, which, sounds great as a place to get stuck in, but those resorts are not cheap. And so they were talking about how they were draining their savings, just desperate to get back home after a few days of saying, oh, yeah, we'll stay longer. Well, they were the only ones in the resort. And then I think I have friends who are flight attendants, and there is a health issue. I mean, in that middle period, people were like, oh, it's great to fly because I'm the only one on the plane. Yeah. But then the TSA agents started coming down with positive coronavirus tests, and everyone started worrying about it. It became much more complicated. And I think I would argue that what airlines are going to try to fight against too is that perception that it's scary to fly. This is similar to 9/11, obviously for different reasons. But that perception of getting on a plane and feeling like you're okay, especially how tight coaches, I mean, they have taken away inches over the years. And I was just thinking about, when am I going to feel like it's okay to be so close to a stranger again on a plane for an extended amount of time?
That's the question. You mentioned customer service and an opportunity here from sort of a marketing standpoint to really sort of show your best face, and that's why you see, for example, loyalty programs. You've seen major chains like Marriott, United Airlines, all the major airlines extending the loyalty status that you have now in early 2020 all the way to early 2022. So they're looking at a pretty big window to try to make you comfortable within that space. what you're describing, Claudine, interestingly, didn't happen years ago, weeks ago. It happened like a few days ago, where these are stories that are still
Oh, I know,
materializing.
right? It was
And
so
so,
fast.
yeah, so when we're on the other side of this apex and we start to sort of feel like, okay, we can maybe start looking at traveling again, we're going to remember this pretty vividly. The fact of the matter is, this virus is not disappearing once we're on the other end of that apex, on this downhill of that curve that we keep talking about. It could rear its ugly head again. Certainly, we'll be better prepared in a couple of months. We're looking at vaccines. We're looking at antiviral medicines to help by the time we get to maybe the fall season. But I think as people begin to start doing their travel planning, an international destination could be further down their priority list. We are seeing that different countries have different methodologies and different programs in place to deal with it. So if you're going to a destination that, for example, does have a 14-day quarantine in place when, say, the U.S. does not, that's going to have an effect on how you travel.
Yeah.
So I think domestic travel is going to be the way to go right out of the gate. Slowly but surely, international travel will follow suit.
Right. Well, let's talk about the current fallout, though, if we want to just kind of really get down to the nitty gritty, so people really understand the impact of what this has had. And you talked about this is crazy short time, and that's been my standard line. I'm like, something that sounds like a good idea on Monday, on Wednesday sounds like you were crazy for suggesting it, because that's how quickly our lives have changed so dramatically within a blink of an eye. And so same with the industry. When you talk about airlines and how much they've slashed, what does this really have? What does this mean to them and has meant to them business wise and economy wise? When you talk about everyone's referencing them or needing the bailouts.
Yeah, no, the airlines have had to really sort of took the lead there on slashing their capacity, parking a lot of their aircraft, and hundreds of aircraft are currently just sort of parked out there in hub airports. United Airlines, for example, for the month of April has slashed international flights by 90%. Now that's for the month of April. Some other restrictions in their flights are through the month of May. June is when we start to see things come around. I think by the end of May, early June, we'll start to hear stories about some of these flights coming back online, some of these aircraft being brought back on. But right now, I think it's anywhere from 50 to 90% the number of aircraft and the number of flights that airlines are providing out of the United States. And we're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, that's huge, right? And so then what about hotels? Because if no one's flying to these places, no one's staying. And I think hotels make people nervous. I've heard people say that too. I don't want to touch anything in here. We're only feeling safe in our own homes.
Yeah. No, hotels are seeing in the major cities like San Francisco, for example, occupancy rates between 10 and 20%. So clearly not enough people in those beds to allow these hotel chains to see any sort of revenue, significant revenue. So the focus there has been in trying to protect the employee base there. The projection is about 50% of hotel employees may end up losing their jobs or being furloughed in the short term. And when you look at the tourism industry as a whole here in the United States, the U.S. Travel Association puts the number of people employed by the tourism industry in the States at a close to 16 million people. And if you're looking at projections of anywhere from 30 to 50% of those employees being jobless, even if it's for a couple of months, it tells you the kind of impact that it's having on a personal level, and then certainly on a business level. But if there's good news here is that a lot of these projections, a lot of these actions are short-lived, and now we're looking at through the end of April, end of May, and it's looking like June is sort of that light at the end of the tunnel as far as the kind of projections that a lot of these travel companies are making.
But that would just depend on what the virus does, right? I mean, I think it's like schools. They're saying, okay, we're not going to come back in May, but no one's talking about the fall, because what if it swings back around? I mean, that's the problem, right? Is that we're saying May because we're hoping June will be better, because we all want June to be better. But if you take a place like Disneyland, I mean, that's a big ask to open that up if we're not allowed to gather in more than 10 or 15 people at a time.
That's exactly right. No. Yeah, a lot of this is based on I don't want to say assumptions, but certainly projections that we're making based on the data and the heads up we're getting from the personnel and the professionals that we're listening to every day, trying to get sort of a gauge on how we should comport ourselves on a day-to-day basis until we get to the really sort of the bottom of the other side of that curve. You mentioned Disneyland. They're starting resorts, including the Aulani in Hawaii, the resorts in Southern California and Florida. They're starting to take reservations at resorts. They're starting June 1st. Southwest announced they're relaunching California to Hawaii flights on June 7th. So yeah, so generally speaking, the industry is really kind of hanging their head on June as sort of a turnaround month. But listen, I mean,
is
it's
that
going to be
smart?
driven by what we see.
I wonder if
I
that's
think
smart, because would people be more disappointed if they book and then it's canceled again?
Yeah. It's driven by, I think, the desire that the industry has to really just kind of get back to normal as soon as possible. It's also driven by pent-up consumer demand. I mean, I think you are seeing people who are at home continuing to do some planning, some booking, even for the latter half of the year. And I think that what we're going to see is that people will in fact take advantage, even if it's a window of opportunity, because let's say this does in fact come back as an issue in the fall. And maybe there are going to be sections of the country that are going to have to see 14-day sort of slowdowns, if you will. But it's going to be these drive market destinations that I think are going to benefit. I think people are going to be looking for we've been cooped up for weeks and weeks, right? So I think these outdoor destinations, more remote destinations, and close by destinations that we can get to by getting in our own car with our close family that we've been with for weeks, and then traveling up or down the coast, or and those are the trips that really
I can see someone
right
saying Yosemite National Park, let's go there, because you could drive somewhere, you could camp, or you could rent a cabin to yourself, you could hike, you could still socially distance if you wanted to, but you could feel like you're a little freer, versus something, and I don't want to pick on Disneyland because I know people were crushed when that when the park closed, and that's obviously unprecedented, but that's a much harder place, and to figure out how, if you're going to socially distance and in lines and capacity, and how you would actually make that happen seems much more complicated.
It is. It's funny how it's hard to sort of wrap your head around that. I get Disneyland, I have to say, does still have a major media event planned for July around Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, I'm scheduled to go to this event in July. And clearly, I've got I got 3 kids. I mean, me going out there and coming back is something that I'm more conscious of than ever before. So yeah, that is, I feel like it's going to be one of these things where someone's going to have to take the lead. If Disneyland continues with this June 1st target date and bookings begin to happen, and we start to see restrictions and mandates ease up, then we're going to start to see a slow wave in that direction. But it will be cautious footing at the beginning. But you mentioned the word freedom. That's what we have been stripped of in this situation. For those of us who love to travel, the freedom to be able to get up and go wherever we want and whenever we want, and to get there however we like. So we're having to we're anxious to get that freedom back. We're just going to have to do it in, I use the phrase baby steps. I mean, we have to do it in terms that we feel comfortable with as individual travelers. And that's why I think that road trip inside our own vehicle with our immediate family is going to be probably that first trip that I'm going to take with my wife and 3 kids with a dog in the back. But I'm really excited, and I'd love to plan that trip to Europe as soon as I possibly can. But that one's going to be my first one. And I think a lot of people are thinking the same way.
I think if going to the grocery store for the first time ever in my life makes me nervous now in a way that is such a strange and uncomfortable feeling, then the idea of a vacation, which is supposed to be relaxing, by the way. However, I mean, it is a different way to look at it. And I love travel. And so that's a complicated, internal battle to wage. So do you think the industries that come back first, then, given what you're saying, are maybe the rental car companies, the RV companies, or those types of companies that may see the first semblances of, okay, maybe we're trying to remember the life we once lived 2 months ago?
Yeah, you've actually mentioned rental car companies. All of the industries in the travel sector, car rental companies tend to be doing better now than anybody else, and they are seeing reservations for the summer months into the fall season. Those reservations are happening within the car rental industry. So yeah, I think you're right. That's the part of the industry that's going to fare well. I think a lot of these, you know, when you look at destinations, you have all these marketing organizations that target a variety of different destinations across the country, from state to county to city to little towns. It's those little towns that I think have an opportunity here. Anything that's off the beaten path, any destination that is in the shadows of a larger metropolitan area, has an opportunity here to target a very you know, anxious and ready to go kind of you know, a group of travelers here,
they may have to
who are
reinvent
going to try to
themselves,
feed
right?
that. Exactly right. It is, and I think technology is allowing them to do that. So right now, the virtual travel is the flavor of the day. I'm getting emails from tiny little towns in South Carolina, in Indiana, in parts of Northern California. You know, people forget that north
Yeah.
of the Bay Area, there's like 400 miles of California still to go. All those little towns up there in the redwood forests and in, you know, these coastal, you know, raw coastal areas. Those are the areas that really have a chance here to reinvent themselves a little bit, use technology, use the sort of virtual tools at our disposal to kind of entice people. Because these virtual travel opportunities don't only feed your wanderlust and allow you to sort of escape while you're stuck at home, they're a great way to research destinations that you might be thinking about going to as well. So that's, you know, these sort of online, virtual, live cam type of opportunities are there for the taking, especially I think for these smaller, off the beaten path, drive market destinations that will be the first to benefit.
And I think
when we begin to see things change.
yeah, I think people are getting used to it. They're used to telemedicine now. If they've had a doctor's appointment in the last couple of weeks, they're used to, you know, for the college seniors, they're doing virtual tours instead of visiting at spring break, which is what many were planning on doing, and they have to make some decisions based on that. So then I think the people who are creating them have to get better at them pretty quickly to say, okay, how can we serve you? And then the people who do that will be rewarded first as the recovery comes back. I mean, my computer screen pops up some strange destination every time it comes up, and I'm like, ooh, where's that? And it's always somewhere remote. It is always somewhere remote and not. Let's talk about the industry that I wonder if we'll ever recover ever from this fully. And that's that cruise industry. Man, if you weren't a fan or you were on the fence of taking a cruise before this, you are going to be hard pressed to get someone on a boat. I mean, there are certainly the diehards, the ones who cruise 7, 8 times, 10 times a year, and they're always signing up for the next one. But the cruise industry, not only in just bookings, but in perception and how people view them. And now that people are trapped on ships around the world, I mean, it's hard to imagine a recovery timeline for the cruise ship industry.
It's going to be slow. There's no doubt about that. You mentioned those avid cruisers. About 15 to 20% of the U.S. population would consider themselves an avid cruiser, multiple cruises within a year. And that's going to be sort of the lifeboat for the industry. It's going to be that core group of avid cruisers, most of whom I would predict will still cruise. I mean, the bargain is factor in cruising is going to be like we've never seen. We're already seeing some major cruise lines put out $49 deposits for a cruise. You know, you may want to schedule now for, say, fall of later this year. And interestingly, cruise bookings for early 2021 are actually doing pretty well. And again, that's that core group of cruisers.
Wow, that's really surprising to me.
Yeah. So they're betting that this thing is going to be temporary. They're not cruising now, but they will cruise later in the year. Now, here's the thing. The travel industry, the cruise industry started 2020 with the understanding that when you look at the number of ships that are scheduled to come online over the next decade, that core group, it was certainly not going to suffice. There was a push already underfoot to cast a wider net, to get younger cruisers, to get what they call the non-cruiser back and to consider cruising again. So that was a sort of universal marketing campaign that was very quickly had to be put on hold. How does the cruise industry rebound? I've got a lot of colleagues in the industry who've got very bullish about this idea that the cruise industry is done for. I'm not nearly that bullish. I think it is going to take longer than other sectors of the industry to get back on track. I think it's got to be smart about how it promotes its the safety factor on a cruise ship. How do you clean those cabins? What kind of practices are in place to screen passengers as they come on board? What if something does happen during a cruise? Why are we seeing cruise lines just sort of drifting, for weeks on weeks in international waters? Some of this needs to be taken care of, so when this kind of thing happens again, and it will to some degree, we're better equipped to deal with it. And I think that the cruise industry is going to have to focus on what can make a cruise experience more personalized, more boutique-y. Maybe it's the river cruises where you've got much more elbow room between yourself and the cruiser next to you that come online a little bit more easily at the beginning because it's more remote, it's more personalized, it's less of a mega cruise experience. But there's no doubt, I think it's going to survive, I think, but it's going to be a longer journey for that industry, for that part of the industry to come back on track.
It'll look different. I wonder, do you think, as we talk about how quickly it changed and how, everyone had to respond when you've got a ship with 3,000 people on board and no one will let you in the port. Is this the cruise industry's fault? Were they doing something before that set them up for, I don't want to call it a failure, although when you've got people who can't get off your ship, there's a lot of people who would call that. Or do you think that they just got caught in the whirlwind that was the coronavirus in the way that so many industries and so many people did? I mean, there are people who will argue that we should have seen and been better prepared for a pandemic, but really the speed at which this happened, do you think the cruise industry could have done anything better to keep them from the situation they're in now, or is this just par for the coronavirus course?
Well, I think there have been a handful of these cases here, and still close to a half dozen ships apparently that are still kind of out at sea, to be honest with you. So I think if you look at these specific cruises that have made the news or that were hit with coronavirus cases on board, you're going to find areas where things could have been done better, could have been done differently. I think that the cruise industry spends an amazing amount of revenue promoting itself. And there is a lot that happens within the cruise industry that should make travelers feel pretty good about cruising that never really gets highlighted. Protocols to keep ships clean. We hear norovirus stories here and there, but when you consider the number of cruisers that are on under normal circumstances at sea at any particular time, there's a pretty good track record there when it comes to the safety factor for cruise industries. We got to be honest. Boarding procedures, that sort of thing. I think there needs to be more of a spotlight on what the industry is doing to keep consumers safe and healthy, and take some maybe that's going to be take some money away from that constant promotion aspect
of the water slide on board or the rock wall, and now we've got to talk about how cleaning is done and how precautions
and how the
taken.
Buffet experiences actually can be done healthily. I mean, that's where we have to
on board, those kind of things.
Right,
yeah.
That's exactly right. And what if something like this happens? What are the protocols already in place so that if we can fast forward to the worst case scenario, which we never thought we'd need to deal with, but we have in the last couple of weeks, what is that we're going to do? What are the protocols in place on an international level that will allow a cruise ship to cater to its passengers as quickly as possible when something like this starts up again?
Okay.
And that's where I think the focus has got to be, and they're ready for a long sail.
You got to imagine they're having big discussions about that right now, and how to gain the trust back so that people will spend their money and get back one of those ships. I'm surprised about the bookings, but you're right. The people who have cruised on it for a long time have a sense of familiarity if they're going on 7 to 10 cruises and nothing bad has ever happened, and this is their one time where they got stuck or they got canceled, then they are more flexible as opposed to the person who was going to go on their first cruise.
Right.
Those new cruisers are going to take a little bit to get back, I would imagine. So your best tips now then, if someone's sitting there going, well, I love to travel, I also love to stay healthy, and I want to do my part, and I don't want to, your best tips that last for this week, because
for today, really.
For today it changes quickly.
Well, I think that my projection is that travel will in fact rebound. I think if you are anxious to get out of the house as soon as that green light hits your neighborhood or wherever it is you're living, is to look at these very manageable destinations and trips that you can control really, really well. That's why I'm thinking exactly right. So you know, it's that drivable vacation with your family to a destination that you're going to feel good about when you get there, because you can do the social distancing. If that's kind of the mode we're still in, then those are the trips that we should be ready to plan right out of the gate. Internationally, it's going to be destinations that, I mean, listen, Scandinavia's done a really great job at handling this. And the places like Norway and Sweden offer some majestic, remote destinations for travelers. Maybe these are the places that will start to see some of that initial foot traffic. When you look at Canada, for example, wonderful metropolitan towns in like a place like Toronto and Vancouver, but really there's an amazing amount of space that we're dealing with. And domestically, I think the U.S. domestic market is going to surge. I think, you know, and I think a lot of these open air, adventure driven destinations are going to benefit first. So I say, don't be scared away from planning, be realistic. And this is a new normal. I mean, the fact of the matter is that protocols are going to now be in place that have never existed before, that may force us to tweak travel planning in very short order again until we get our arms around this completely. But this idea that we should continue to aspire to travel, to dream about traveling. It is, at the end of the day, a cathartic, healthy thing to do if it's done correctly under the right circumstances. So I'm waiting for that green light. It's going to be baby steps at the beginning, but continue to dream, continue to plan, continue to have your dream list, because this too, as they say, shall pass.
And we may have a lot of vacation days saved up by the end of it if no one's traveling right now, and maybe you can take a little bit of longer one. And yeah, it's going to be a green light and then a yellow one, I think, for quite a while. But if we can get out of the red light stop, that would be
that's what we want.
That's
exactly.
what we want. All right, Gabe Saglier, great travel expert and great tips as always. We appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, Claudine.
And you can find more on coronavirusnow.com. Thanks for joining us.